GRL's Victory Vault, where we dive into the stories behind the cases that have made a significant impact on our clients' lives. Hello everyone, and welcome to GRL's Victory Vault, where we dive into the stories behind the cases that have made a positive impact in our clients' lives. I'm Grant Gangstead. Today I've got Cory Gourley with me, partner here at GRL Law, who championed justice for a client's family, individual who was tragically killed in a mining accident. So welcome, Cory.
Thank you.
Without further ado, I guess let's just start with some background on this case.
You bet.
Tell me kind of what happened and how you got involved.
Yeah, sure. So this was an extraordinarily tragic case, as all cases are where someone perishes unnecessarily. But this was a mining death case, and there were a whole bunch of mistakes that had to occur for this to actually result in this young guy's death. He was a miner, had only been mining for a short period of time, and was relatively young, 29 or 30 at the time of his passing, and fell into some mining equipment that he shouldn't have had access to, and ultimately was crushed in a processing piece of equipment. The case came to us because we've had the opportunity to work on some gross negligence cases, as you know, Grant. Under Iowa law, a worker's only recourse against a company if they're injured on the job is generally workers' compensation. But the exception to that exclusive remedy is gross negligence. And if an employer is grossly negligent in their handling of the employee or the site, then they can be held accountable. We've had the opportunity to litigate some gross negligence cases, which are pretty complicated here in Iowa, and there haven't been a lot of law firms that have undertaken gross negligence cases or been able to prosecute them successfully. So, because of that background and that previous success, we were referred this client in this situation to explore the situation for them.
Okay, so you kind of touched on this a little bit. Workers' compensation is typically, your employer screws up and you can go after your employer under workers' compensation.
Exactly.
Now, the gross negligence is kind of an elevated claim that you can make if your employer really screws up. It's
yes.
a heightened standard.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And you can get damages over and above and beyond what you otherwise would through the workers' compensation procedure.
Yeah, a unique aspect of the workers' compensation process is that, generally speaking, it's no fault in that the employer is responsible for certain damages if an employee is hurt during or while they're employed and during the work day or work hours. However, the recovery is limited, and there are certain schedules of amounts that you're entitled to as a worker, and those are limited as compared to the recovery that's available in a general negligence action, or in this case, a gross negligence action.
So when you say scheduled injuries, a finger's worth this amount, an arm's worth this amount, whole body's worth this amount.
Yeah, it's a little odd to think about to say, oh, this person's life is worth X, or this person's arm is worth X, but that's really how the law is in Iowa. Based upon the severity of the injury, you get a very certain amount of money, but a very limited amount of money.
Okay. So in this particular case, there was a gross negligence claim, so you could claim for damages above and beyond what those set numbers are for.
Yeah, we believed after our investigation of this claim, including after review of the OSHA investigation of the claim, that the conduct in this was so egregious that it rose to the level of gross negligence and exceeded, and what we believed far exceeded that of just a general lack of reasonable care like a negligence case is.
Okay. So in this particular case, you're going against that employer. Who are the parties, or who are, obviously we have a person who's deceased. Who are you representing, or who kind of the players in this litigation?
Yeah, a unique part of this case was in some instances when a family member is seriously injured or passes away, one attorney or firm can represent the entire family. In this case, because of just certain circumstances of the family and their familiarity or lack of familiarity with each other, they weren't comfortable all having the same legal team. And so we actually worked with another legal team as well, and each represented certain parts of the family.
Okay. And our particular client was the father of the person who was deceased?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So the case comes to us, obviously a devastating event for the family. Share with me kind of how that trauma affected the client and what happened, after the person was deceased. How did that affect them?
Yeah, it's something they don't teach in law school. They teach us a lot about the law, and they teach us a lot about procedure, and they teach us about evidence and contracts and those type of things, but they don't teach about true loss. They don't teach about walking the journey of grief with a family and how that affects people differently. And that's a different, I would say, part of our job that is that we're not necessarily trained on, but you got to be really, you need to be really well acquainted with and hopefully good at if you really want to help a family through this process, because it's not just a legal process. Legal process is really a small part of the grief journey. And when you're walking that with a client, it's unique in every circumstance. In this one, our client was stoic a lot of the time, and times until he wasn't. And when you get to trial in these cases, you really have to dig in and prepare for reliving what occurred, the story, the loss that's involved, all the family events that they're not at, that they won't participate in. It's really hard, and it's tough seeing someone go through that as they process that again and basically have to relive it. But it was extremely difficult. Our clients luckily were courageous enough to do it, and they've got to be for us to be able to get and achieve justice for them.
So we talked a little bit about our client and some of the trauma that he experienced. Obviously, that's going to be different for each one of the clients who are involved, or each one of the parties that's involved. With that many people, or different kind of family members and aspects in play, share with me how you guys, as the collective legal team, were able to get that to the jury, to get it to trial. What were kind of some of the milestones along the way? How did it progress?
Yeah, so the biggest milestones in these cases are typically the motions for summary judgment. But to back up just a little bit, the families filed lawsuits at different times in these cases. And there's something called consolidation, which can occur when two different lawsuits or more arising out of the same occurrence are filed, but they really are all part and parcel of the same legal issues. And so in that case, the courts typically like to consolidate those cases. And so the first question was, do we consolidate them strategically, and is it best for our clients? And then secondly, how do we go about that? So that was the first fight. We were able to effectively consolidate them because we felt like it would be best to present these families' stories all together. But then the bigger fight was actually getting these claims to the jury. In Iowa, gross negligence cases are construed very strictly. And so historically, they are difficult to get to juries, and the Iowa courts have a very strict view of what rises to the level of gross negligence, what is egregious enough conduct by an employer to, in fact, constitute gross negligence. So there was something called a motion for summary judgment, which basically is the defense saying, I want to throw this out of court. I want this should never see the light of day in court, and the jury shouldn't get to consider it. And there were actually two filed in this case. And that was a very big legal battle to survive that. We did survive it. And then those same arguments were brought up prior to trial and during trial and at the close of trial, and we had to survive those arguments over and over again. So that was a very significant legal hurdle that we have to contend with in some cases, but is particularly a daunting hurdle in these cases. Luckily, we were able to get over that legal hurdle to get this to the jury.
So that summary judgment motion, the defense is saying, hey, you don't have enough evidence to say that this was bad enough to get this claim in front of a jury or past this stage of the proceeding, correct?
Yeah. They say, A, we don't think this was our fault. B, even if it was, it wasn't that bad. And C, even if it was bad, it wasn't so bad that it rises to the level of gross negligence. So they've got kind of a few extra bites at the apple there to try to get out of it from a legal perspective and to get a judge to say, you know what, we're not even going to consider this.
So you made it past that hurdle. They kind of keep bringing up this same argument as the stages of the proceeding keep going. And at each stage, you were able to overcome that argument from the defense.
Yeah, correct. The defendants have the opportunity to raise some of these issues in various forms. We addressed some of them prior to trial. Again, we addressed them at the close of our evidence, which is standard. There's a motion for a directed verdict in favor of the defense, which is just basically saying, now that the court has heard all of the argument, all of the evidence that we have presented, hey, that evidence doesn't rise to the level of this standard. And then once again, even after the jury comes back and says, yes, plaintiffs prevail, then they say again, well, even though plaintiffs prevail, the court should throw it out again. So we had to address this on a multitude of occasions. In fact, more times in this case than I've ever had to address it in any other case.
Okay. So obviously this case gets to a jury, right? Tell us about how the trial went and kind of how the jury reacted and what your thoughts were about the actual trial itself.
Yeah, we were able to create a good rapport with the jury early on, which is very important. But one of the practical hurdles in this case was to have two entirely separate legal teams on the same side, but presenting the trial in their own way, with their own strategies and their own method of storytelling. And it is rare that we are not the ones that have control of that, or at least the ones that go first. And I actually had to go second because of some legal positioning, because they actually filed the case first. They got their case first. And that was really difficult to adjust to what another attorney was doing, because we have got our ways of doing things and we like our ways of doing things. Right. And so that was a kind of a practical hurdle of trying to have your strategy, but then kind of adjusting on the fly based upon how they were doing things as well. Yeah.
So jury hears it and they come back in your favor, in your client's favor.
Yeah, we obtained a total collective judgment of $3 million for the families that were involved in this case that the jury awarded to us. Yeah.
Okay. So beyond the legal aspect, beyond the monetary aspect, how did this case resolution provide to the family, to the client's family? How did it provide a resolution to them outside of just the monetary value?
Yeah, when you get cases like this with such tragic consequences, you really need to start from the outset explaining to the family that the legal process really is just one small part of this grieving process. Because if the family puts too much emphasis on the legal aspect, and the results of the case can be devastating, and sometimes as devastating as the events themselves, or as re-traumatizing if they're not properly prepared. And so we really had to work with the family to say, we believe in this case. We believe a jury will believe in this case. We believe a judge will allow us to present it. But if not, that doesn't lessen the importance of your loss, of your son's life, of your husband's life, the father's life. And so all of that said, when you get the verdict, it really is vindication for the family that their son's life was worth something, that the defendants did some really egregious things to lead us to this situation, and ultimately then that the justice prevailed, and that our community in Iowa was holding those folks accountable for what they had done and what they could have prevented.
Sure. So obviously this has been really impactful on the client and on the family. Tell me what, in your mind, were some of the key moments, key strategies that led you to getting a successful resolution of this case.
Boy. In this case, we really had to focus on the number of mistakes that were made and how they were just stacked one on top of another that led to this. We had, and I don't remember the exact number, I want to say it was 18 different specific mistakes that they had made with the equipment, with the protection that they didn't have, with their procedures and protocols that our experts were able to point to say if they do one of them, they get one of them correct, then all of this goes away. And to be so neglectful that you do none of those and to stack those on top of them or present them as, if a driver drives through one stop sign and makes a mistake and blows it and avoids an accident, that's neglect. What if you blow through 18 stop signs in a row? And so to explain stacking all of that negligence on top of each other was very important for liability. And then once again, like any other trial, to attempt to convey the gravity of the loss, to attempt to convey not having a family member at Christmas and not being at that next birthday party and not being at graduation and not being able to be there for their children's weddings and all that stuff. That's always very impactful as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's one thing to, kind of to lay out and stack up those failures by the company, right? And it's another thing to show the impact and, as you said, the things that you're going to miss out on, those things that the family's going to miss out on. Two separate things, but both very important and very powerful in the case.
And really very different skill sets. I mean, there are, very big law firms where lawyers focus on very small parts of those, but liability can get very technical in these situations. And we had an engineer from out of state that was an expert in mining and mining equipment. And so learning that discipline, learning that industry is very technical, and that takes a lot of work and a lot of study. But then, once again, walking that grief journey and then conveying that grief journey to 8 strangers, different skill sets, but both equally important, especially in this case.
Sure.
Yep.
So we've had some time pass since this case was tried and a verdict was rendered by the jury. How's the client doing now at this point?
The clients are doing relatively well, is what I can say. They have felt a big load taken off their shoulders. Now the case isn't over, unfortunately. There was a bunch of post-trial litigation where even after all those steps we previously described, the defendants filed post-trial motions asking that the verdict be set aside or they be granted a new trial or everything be thrown out. And so we had to litigate that for the better part of a year. We prevailed on that, and now they're going to appeal it. And so that appeal process is going right now. And so it really is unfortunate for the family that the justice process can take this long, and there are so many hurdles. But we've prevailed so far to this point. We're going to keep fighting.
Well, obviously, those cases that drag on, they're tough fights, but we always learn some lessons throughout those fights, win or lose, right? Yeah. Give me something, a lesson or an insight or something that you gained as an attorney or just as a person from this particular case or this particular trial.
All the bites of the apple the defense has in a case like this, and really how much the law is stacked against people that are harmed in these cases is scary. I understand the workers' compensation construct and the framework, and I understand the purpose behind that. But to say then that it is almost impossible for there to be any conduct above and beyond that you could hold people accountable for, that can't be the law in Iowa. And so to make sure that we fight hard enough that we preserve whatever small access there is to justice there. That was eye-opening to me. And you know this, you do this, but we work hard lobbying it on the Hill to try to make the laws as good as we can for Iowans. And then we work hard in the courts to do the same thing. But just how narrow of a window we have for recovery in these types of cases and how hard they are, that was eye-opening for me in this case. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a tough fight and a good win. Despite the tragedy suffered here today, hearing about this case, it sounds like it was a positive result for the clients and the client's family, and it's uplifting to hear that justice can be done in those cases. So, Cory, appreciate you coming in and chatting today.
You bet.
Thanks to our listeners for listening today as well. Join us again on the next episode of GRL Victory Vault, and we'll dig into some more cases that have had positive impacts.